this post, which I find out, I think I wouldn't say it's controversial, but I think the person who made this post, I think she exaggerated what she said. Originally, this was on LinkedIn, but I couldn't find it on LinkedIn, so I found it on Instagram. You need to remember that internet remembers everything. What you put there stays forever. So as I understood, she deleted from her InDesign. It's called
Instagram.
LinkedIn. But
Yeah.
I found it on Instagram. So basically,
It's also worth mentioning as well that we're being careful not to sort of out who's saying this. Again, design is very subjective. But as Julian said, the internet remembers. So I think it's an interesting sort of conversation we can have about this without pointing fingers, if that makes sense.
but I think in this situation I will be a prosecutor because I think that the person is looking just from one perspective and not trying to understand other perspectives. So basically, she's saying that she got rejected for creative role not because of the portfolio, not because of the skills, because she don't use the Adobe Photoshop, right? So she's saying that she using Affinity. She was using you can see on the screen. So she was using Affinity Designer, Affinity Photo, so different software which Affinity is producing. Okay, so why I see here as a problem. First of all, Photoshop is like, it's like if you go and pray, like before going to sleep. This is the first thing as a designer you need to know because this is the basis. It's
They
like
call it the Holy Trinity of using InDesign, Illustrator, and Photoshop. That's always what we were taught in college and in university as well. Everything ran through Adobe.
yes. Okay, let's put it this way. First of all, look on our where is it? The logo? Yeah. So you can see inspiration, right? I think if not, just look closer where it's coming from.
You'll catch it.
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. We use in Adobe, but I will say mildly we're disagree about the pricing thing, right? So kind of like, not as you expected if you were working as a graphic designer. But this is the standard. This is
industry standard.
This is industry standard. When you're entering this design world, you're gonna use Photoshop, InDesign, whatever. You're coming to another company in about 80 something percent. I look on the market share if we're talking about 2D design software. So the about Adobe is holding about 80% of the market. One of the other competitors is CorelDRAW, which I haven't heard for years. The last time I heard someone require CorelDRAW, yeah, I look on just for my curiosity in Latvia. There was one company they were hiring someone and they were require CorelDRAW. Usually CorelDRAW, like you're not using it, so you have a small percentage. So Affinity is somewhere there with the CorelDRAW, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to use it, fine. Like you can use the paintbrush if you really wanna. It's absolutely fine. But look from other perspective. So you saying that you were discriminated because you were using not using the Photoshop, you use Affinity, so you don't know how to use the Photoshop, right? So you come into some business, yeah, and the person who's interviewing you saying like, "Wow, you're great," but you saying to him or her like, "I don't know how to use Photoshop, but I'm using Affinity." So what does it mean? This guy who is hiring you he needs to go to the tech team and say, hey, we have a very great guy, but he's not using Photoshop. Can we get the Affinity license? So what does it mean? If I'm talking about the small business to big business. So this means that from the tech team, they going to they are like a manager or maybe the finance department and say, hey, we need the 500 extra pounds for the Affinity. So like you can see that it's not that easy. If there is one person coming and saying, I want to use Affinity, you can't just give it to him because, like, I want it. You need to understand that it's not that easy,
Is there a case though? Because we see this a lot, more so in the sort of video production side. When you have a lot of people are moving away from Premiere, for example, right? And people are favoring DaVinci Resolve. Because quite frankly, it is better software. A lot of our gripes with Adobe isn't, it's expensive. That's part of it. It's expensive for what you get. The sort of quality isn't, it's the applications aren't very stable. Me and you have lost hours of work because it's crashed or files are missing or something. And so I think people putting forward alternatives. So let's say, like, if you're a production house, why not shift from, let's say, Premiere and After Effects, Audacity, to something like DaVinci Resolve? And it'd be up to the sort of financial officer or whoever's project manager or whoever is the key stakeholder there, who has who would have the power to switch. Would you see companies doing that to get away from Adobe's monopoly, really? They are the ones, they are an industry standard. Is there software that people think of when when you think of design? Do you think that the world could switch to something like Affinity Designer? Like, obviously there'd be a lot of friction as people move software, change licenses, whatever. But do you think that could happen?
It's a very good question. Because Adobe is not just they're producing the software, they are making the courses, they are making events like I don't know how it's called, like probably it's called Convention. So
yeah, Adobe Max. I think I want to say it's on around now. I might be wrong. We've not been invited yet, so we'll wait for that one.
I think that's if there would be a new player on the market, they need to provide not just a software. They need to make those courses. There should be they need to show the whole involvement. Otherwise, I don't see how. We can see that, like you said, there is DaVinci. I think there is still Sony Vegas. I think they changed the name. They called Vega, something like this. So slightly, other companies are biting at Adobe. They are. For example, if we're talking about 3D world, Adobe is not even close to be the top. Yes, they have a Adobe Substance, and there is a light version called Adobe Dimension. But there is a Blender which is absolutely free. Cinema 4D, Maya, Houdini, Nuke.
Yeah,
I think Nuke is produced by the same company who's doing DaVinci, by the way.
Yeah, because you got Fusion as well.
Yes.
So Fusion is more of a that's like an After Effects competitor.
Yeah, I think that's it's a good question. So the Adobe, the first Photoshop was launched about 20, 30 years ago or something.
I'd have to check.
Yeah, but about
a while ago.
A while ago. So they built a reputation. they were probably they were like pioneers, you know, in the market. I'm not saying they were the first who made the raster software, like
1990.
yeah. So
Well, it's an interesting one because I think the way that they did it was they created the software and then they were very quick to roll it out to education, to roll it out to institutions, roll it out to the universities, make sure that there are licenses available so people are sort of in the system of learning how to use these programs as early as possible. Jam in the YouTube comments. I'll get back to that in a second. But Jam was on my he was on my sort of graphic. It was called graphic communication, I think, back in GCSE. So this was what 14, 15, 16 ish. We were already, you know, sort of put onto the Adobe system, and there was no alternative available. Another sort of theory I saw, I can't remember where I saw it, but I do believe it, is that Adobe intentionally made their software easy to pirate for the exact same reason that as long as people start using it in some way, they can then grab you later on. Because when you're in industry, you can't be pirating stuff. It's just not. It's not the way to do it. You pay for your license, you pay for your fonts, you do things by the book, but you're already in the system, you know. So I think that's how they've sort of built that monopoly, and that's why it's so difficult for other companies to try and put their software forward and say, hey, look, this is also great. Figma's a good example, right? So Figma comes out, loads of people love it, and then Adobe goes to try and buy out Figma. I can't remember if it actually went through. I have a feeling that they actually got stopped because of anti-monopoly laws. So
I can't remember, to be honest.
yeah, but either way, it's an interesting sort of sense of like people are realizing that Adobe is probably too big, and they're not allowing for alternatives. But again, like, as much as we can rag on Adobe, Photoshop is a good software when it works. After Effects is a good software when it works. Same with Illustrator. And the fact that all of these sort of speak to each other as well and integrate so effectively is what makes it so appealing, and why most likely this lady here was rejected for not using the Adobe stuff. Because you might have to correct me on here, Jam, if you're still in the comments, but can you export files in like CorelDRAW, for example, and can they be read by Adobe products? Because he mentions here CorelDRAW is more popular in digital fabrication, so it's used a lot for laser cutting. So I think that's quite interesting.
Fun fact: Gershke, the guy who was one of the first CEOs of Adobe, was kidnapped. You know that?
I didn't know that. Go on.
Yeah, he was kidnapped and released then, if I remember it right. I don't remember the whole story. He basically was jogging in the morning, like in his area, where by the way, there's a stream called Adobe. This is where it's coming from. There's a small stream, Adobe. Yeah, and he was kidnapped, and then I'm sorry, very bad preparation, but yeah, I remember he was kidnapped, and yeah, he was released later on.
Were they trying to get their refunds back?
Well, it was before that time, you know.
Yeah. I believe if you convert the file in CorelDRAW to a PDF or other Adobe file format, you can use one to the other. So yeah, I guess that's the thing of like, even if you did have companies that would integrate sort of like outside software, there becomes an extra a link in the chain, like, okay, now we have to convert all of our files to PDFs and then convert from there. And again, Adobe PDFs, as great as they are, they're not always. You know, you try editing text in a PDF, it's like water torture. Point here from Jam. It says, I think as we move towards a more international market, other softwares may grow as poorer countries will be able to afford those licenses, and like international freelancers would be able to afford them. I think that's interesting. I also think, though, that wouldn't they just go for pirated Adobe software to start off with? I think, what do you think about that? Do you think if, as designers, as we get more designers, more international designers, they'll also switch to using different softwares, or do you think Adobe is just the ultimate overlords?
I didn't see on the market any other gamer who who will say like, hey, we're gonna change the industry. I don't see it. I really don't see it. And because of there is AI now, and some of the stuff can be made by AI, that's mean there is a less manual work, right? So it's difficult to say.
I think we'll touch more on AI in a future stream.
100%, there will be a whole stream about AI. We have a lot of like hot topics. So make sure you subscribe.
But I do think, in the same way that we see stuff like Canva, sort of trying to make it easier for people who aren't designers to design. We have stuff like Adobe Express also being pushed very heavily as this sort of like, oh, you don't have to do anything and it'll just do it for you type thing. So maybe that's sort of more of the future. I guess that's more of a preview into a future stream. I do think there's an interesting line in that LinkedIn post where it just says, let's start hiring based on skill, not just software. I mean, that's the sort of crux of the whole thing. It's important to mention that, yeah, okay, if you're making cool stuff, you're making cool stuff. You should carry on making that cool stuff. But I think there does have to be some awareness that you are, when you, at least if you're working in a company and you're not doing freelance stuff, expect to be sort of forced into this machine for the time being, at least, you know, unless Affinity managed to pull something off crazy, or or Microsoft decides to update Publisher or something. You know, I think that's just part of how things are.